Welcome back to Creative Excuses, where we make excuses to be creative out of the video games that we play. I am back with another build video, this time with a hybrid Sorcerer. The Sorcerer is my favorite class, and this is a super fun build with a somewhat unique playstyle. Remember, the full build guide is written down in the description below. In the video, I will not be going over every detail found in the written build because the video is not a guide. The video is a challenge. I want you to go out there and be creative with your own builds. So I'm showing you behind the curtain to see what kinds of problems I run into while making new builds. And then I show you how I solve those problems. Before we jump into the theme, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to see more ESO build challenges like this one. Also, I live stream with my wife over on twitch.tv/creativeexcuses. Come hang out while I make builds and play a variety of games. Right now, my wife Shelby and I are playing through the Halo Master Chief Collection on co-op, and it's been super fun so far. We'd love to see you there. Let's jump into it. As always, we've got to talk about the theme. Now, I really like this other game called Smite, and I've been playing it since the beta. It's a great game, but arguably, the best part of Smite is their card art for their characters. If you've seen thumbnails of my videos in the past, many of them use Smite's card art because it just looks so good. This build was inspired by that card art, and specifically, a piece of art for a character that released sometime last year. Here's the art. It is awesome. The color combination, the pose, the sword, the spell, it all looks great. I saw this and immediately thought, yup, I want a character like that in ESO. I don't know what that says about me, and I don't know why that was my first thought, but it was. At the time, all I knew about this character was that she was a mage, she uses a sword swing to cast her basic attack, and she casts runes for spells. So I wanted to make a build based on what little information I had, but I also added in one extra limitation. I wanted the build's ability bar to look cool. I wanted the art to look good and to look coordinated with the artwork that inspired the build. This is a dumb restriction, but what else am I going to do for fun? Housing? So here's the build challenge. Make a build inspired by a piece of artwork or a character from another game. I know Grimsforge Gaming does this all the time for his PvP builds, and his builds all look freaking awesome. So make it for whatever content you like playing most and whatever role you like playing most. Bonus points for making the ability bar look cool and or color coordinated. Okay, so this is the part where we go over the problems, right? Well, the first problem was the easiest to solve, but it caused all of the other problems. And that is, what skills did I qualify as fitting the theme? Here's the list. From the Sorcerer skills, we've got Crystal Fragments, when it's ready for its instant cast at least, Daedric Tomb and Daedric Minefield, Summon Unstable Familiar and both of its morphs, Summon Winged Twilight and both of its morphs, Hurricane. This one was an early compromise. It's pink-ish, right? From everywhere else, Magicka Detonation from the Assault Tree, Bloodthirst or Rapid Strikes from Dual Wield, Rend or Thrive in Chaos from Dual Wield, Deadly Cloak from Dual Wield, and then Volcanic Rune or Scalding Rune from the Mage's Guild. These were the only abilities I felt fit the theme of the artwork and the Morgana character. Everything else was either too blue, too orange, or too purple. The list is also pretty limited, and it almost automatically made me into a hybrid build, especially since Crystal Fragments really doesn't fit the theme because it only works when it's ready for its proc. Alright, so what problems did these limited front bar choices cause? Well, the first one, which this is a recurring theme in my videos, was Sustain. See, I really wanted to make use of the two rune skills that were available to me, but Daedric Tomb and Daedric Minefield were super expensive to cast. I planned ahead for this by choosing to play as a Breton because of that wonderful cost reduction and the Magicka recovery, but that on its own just wasn't enough for the way that I was playing. Basically, the idea was to use Scalding Rune or Volcanic Rune as the spammable, with Daedric Tomb or Minefield as a big hit semi-spammable, so alternating between the two skills, something like this. Now that did not get even close to working with normal sets, so I tried adding in Rapid Strikes from the Dual Wield skill line to make it work. The basic rotation was Rapid Strikes, Scalding Rune, Daedric Minefield. And it still didn't work. Even 2 Rapid Strikes, Scalding Rune, Daedric Minefield didn't work. Daedric Minefield and Daedric Tomb were just too freaking expensive. Even with the cost reduction, some good light armor on, Sorcerer cost reduction, and 1 Tribrid cost reduction glyph, Daedric Tomb was still 4,300 Magicka for me to cast. So I went a step further and threw on the strongest recovery set that I could find, Hist Whisperer. If you convert the Hist Whisperer 5-piece bonus into recoveries, it gives 600 of each recovery because you can get 1 light attack in per second, and sustain is calculated every 2 seconds. Sustain improved a crap ton, but it still just wasn't enough for Daedric Tomb. So I gave up on Daedric Tomb for this build. But I do have plans for it in the future, so get subscribed so you can see when I make a Daedric Tomb spammable build. That one's going to focus entirely on sustain and just really try and make it where I can hit Daedric Tomb for 3 or 4 times in a row while using a regular rotation. But taking Daedric Tomb out, but keeping Hist Whisperer on the build really let me use almost any abilities I wanted to. If you need sustain, especially some overkill sustain for all 3 stats, Hist Whisperer is a really good choice. The second problem that these limited ability choices gave me was, of course, damage. At the time that I made the build, hybrid builds weren't what they are now. They didn't scale off your highest offensive stats, but armor had just been hybridized to give hybrid passives, so that was helpful, but set bonuses weren't there yet. This meant that my set choices were super freaking limited, and I had already used up one of them for sustain. So I busted out a new faithful at the time, Heartland Conqueror. Heartland Conqueror is mentioned in DPS videos, but it is really slept on for solo play. It enables all sorts of weird stuff, especially with a specific odd dual wield mechanic. And that is that Nirnhoned on dual wield weapons maintains its full value of 15% increased damage, whereas every other trait only gets half of its value. I've got no idea why it does this, but it does. What that means is if you have Nirnhoned on your main hand and any other trait on your offhand, you effectively get 150% effectiveness from your traits already, and that's before Heartland Conqueror. Add in Heartland Conqueror on top of that, and you're getting 300% weapon trait effectiveness. So with Nirnhoned and Charged, like I was using, the Heartland Conqueror 5-piece is effectively worth 200 weapon damage and 240% increased status effect chance. That's insane. When using the abilities that I chose that had good chances for status effects, this was a really nice bonus. And then you add on top of that the hybridized stats, and it was great. Even with the newly hybridized skills, this is still a really solid DPS choice. I rounded out the damage on the build by throwing on an infused Maelstrom Inferno Staff on the back bar, which made my light attacks hit like a truck and gave me a great weapon and spell damage buff. I also threw on Razor Caltrops for that AoE penetration, which obviously helped a ton. Razor Caltrops is an amazing ability. The third problem that I ran into was healing, and this is for one big reason: crit chance. Even though I was using daggers, I wasn't using crit potions or a crit buff ability because it didn't fit the front bar theme. That meant that crit surge was not as effective as it could be. On the front bar, I was sitting at roughly 33% crit chance, which just wasn't enough. So I slotted in Bloodthirst instead of Rapid Strikes, hoping that that would give me enough healing. Because of the charge trait, this actually turned out to be a higher damage option because I had 5 chances per spammable to trigger the Hemorrhaging status effect, which hits as hard as burning, so it was a lot of damage. The ability icon didn't look quite as good as Rapid Strikes, but it would have to do, and it still wasn't enough. So I compromised a little bit. I wasn't using an armor buff yet. This was before I compromised on Hurricane, and Hurricane was so close to being a pink skill as I wanted, so I threw it on the front bar. That made me a bit tankier and got me closer to where I wanted to be, but it still just wasn't enough because I was missing a steady heal over time, a damage shield, or anything else like that. In the short run, I went for the good old crutch, Ring of the Pale Order, and that made things pretty easy. However, in this new patch, I think we can do better than relying on the crutch. Without the Ring of the Pale Order, we are super close to having a comfortable amount of healing for solo content. We just need a little push over the edge. Future me here. This is the part of writing the build video that made me reconsider the build. It actually made me rework a lot. So with the Ring of the Pale Order on, my original theme was trifecta worthy for veteran Vateshran Hollows. But when I took that ring off, oh, it was a lot bigger of a difference than I thought it was. It was a huge oof. So I actually had to redo some other bits of the build. So let's rewind and run it back. Deciding not to use the Ring of the Pale Order was a fun move. I felt like I was so close to getting solid Vateshran clears without the ring, but no matter what I tried, I couldn't get there. I did too much single target damage, but not quite enough to skip the adds, which would end up getting me killed. I was just too squishy, and one big problem was that by limiting my ability choices for the front bar, by being a cheapskate and not using the potions, and by using the sets I had chosen, my crit chance on the front bar was only like 30%. So I just wasn't getting enough healing from Crit Surge. So I changed from Heartland Conqueror to the true Old Faithful, Toothrow. Toothrow allowed me to keep the theme without slotting a crit buff on the front bar, and it bumped me from about 33% crit chance to 50% crit chance, which added a bunch of healing. I was not only getting healed once a second consistently now, I was also getting crit healing consistently, which went a long way towards survivability. But I was still getting slapped. This really shows how strong Ring of the Pale Order is for solo builds. It really is cheating. So I looked at some other options to go alongside Toothrow. And this is where the theme took a little bit of a hit. Remember that list of allowed abilities for the front bar? I compromised even more. I needed a nice heal over time, nothing huge, but I needed something, and I needed just a little bit more defense. So I dropped my Burst Heal Clan Fear in favor of Bound Aegis, which gives 8% extra Magicka, buffing my damage, and Minor Resolve, which gave me like 5% damage mitigation. It doesn't quite fit the theme because the ability icon's a little bit too purple, but it turned out to be a very, very helpful move. I then moved Hurricane to the back bar and compromised the pink by adding Structured Entropy from the Mage's Guild to the front bar. The healing from it is only like 1k every 2 seconds, but it's a strong damage over time, it buffs my damage on the front bar, and it has a heal. It fit the build perfectly. To be honest, I was feeling a little defeated at this point in the build process because I was still getting slapped even after all these changes, which I worked all day on. So to make sure that the build would make it and would be plenty defensive, I swapped out my Slime Craw monster set for Iceheart to add in that small but meaningful 5k damage shield. When I retested the build, this combination was enough to get a trifecta if I hadn't absolutely choked on the final boss and gotten killed in a phase transition. Even with that choke, I got one of my highest scores ever and placed 20th on the leaderboards at the time, which was the highest I have ever placed. And I did it without the crutch. I did it without the Ring of the Pale Order. This was definitely one of my harder builds to make. I started work on this build like 9 months ago and I took forever to finish it the first time, but when I did finish it that first time, I wasn't fully satisfied with it, so I reworked it and that really kicked the crap out of me for a minute there. Not all of my themes are successful. In the end, I do think the front ability bar still looks pretty cool with a general blue and pink theme, and we still have at least one rune on the build. But the perfectionist in me says that I didn't manage the theme and the goal that I had in mind this time, and that's fine. I still think I made a really cool and unique hybrid sorcerer, and I'm happy with that. Alright everybody, don't forget to check the description for the full build guide, including alternative sets for Toothrow in case you're not a cheapskate like me. If you are willing to use the expensive potions, this build will be extremely powerful. Possibly my most powerful build yet for solo play. With that, coming out in the stream at twitch.tv/creativeexcuses, and I'll see you all in the next excuse.